Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to Ecolab's webinar on best practices for preparing to reopen commercial facilities. Now, we know that those of you attending represent many different types of facilities in different parts of the country that may be at very different phases of the reopening process. But wherever you're at in that process, we're here today to discuss heightened sanitary procedures and best practices to help ensure that your employees, customers, and guests return to clean and healthy environments, whether that be now or further into the future. Just a couple of housekeeping reminders before we get started here. One, just want to let everyone know that our presentation from today, as well as the recording of this session, will both be available on the Ecolab Facilities COVID-19 Resource Library within the next few days. We will send out a link once those are available to all attendees, and we will also have Spanish translations available there for both the presentation and the recording within the next couple of weeks. I should also mention, just seeing that there are people representing a number of industries on this webinar, we do also have separate resource pages for education, long-term care, lodging, and food service. So you can find the resources most appropriate to your business. They are the businesses that you serve. Also, for those pursuing continuing education credit, at the end of the presentation, there will be a question that pops up where you can request a certificate of attendance. So with that, I will introduce our presenters for today. If you could advance the slide, please. So presenting today, I'm very pleased to introduce Laura Sidorsky and Max Gelderman. Laura has a 30-year background in sales and training with extensive experience in the cleaning and maintenance industry. She is currently the Region AVP for Facility Care, and in this role, she manages national distributor relationships as well as a team of 12. Laura also holds a master's degree in training and development. Along with Laura today, Max Gelderman has 9 years of experience in research and development and engineering at Ecolab and holds a BS in biochemistry. He's currently a principal technical account specialist where he leverages this experience to provide technical expertise to our North American facilities and food service customers. In this role, he also regularly consults on products and procedure recommendations related to COVID-19. So with that, I will turn it over to Laura.
Thanks, Alexis. I appreciate it. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. You know, depending on where you are in the country and what type of facility you manage or you serve, you may be in a different phase with the reopening process, or you never closed down in the first place. Whatever the case, one thing is for certain, the demands on all of us have changed significantly. There's an increased demand for cleaning and disinfection. There's some visibility challenges that we need to ensure, as well as employee training and costs have gone up. And then there's even a greater need for efficiency. Let's go back to the first one. So if we talk about increased demand for cleaning and disinfection, as businesses begin to reopen, it's really no longer about cleaning for appearance. It's about cleaning for health. We have to be focused on the basic manual cleaning procedures like vacuuming and wiping down surfaces, but we also have to get a little bit more specialized in advanced cleaning protocols to include disinfecting. This may open potential new service offerings for building service contractors that may be on the line, but it also requires additional time and training for the workers. There was a survey conducted by OpenWorks that showed that 83% of business leaders are likely to increase cleaning frequency of their facilities, and most of those people want to see a visible difference in their cleaning capabilities. So just performing the proper hygiene procedures really isn't enough anymore. Employees want to see that visual difference. This may mean shifting working hours to make cleaning more visible during the workday, or when the occupants are present. Our facilities did this with our building service contractors in the facility to make sure that our employees could see what was happening. In terms of employee training and labor costs, whether you've had to bring in new employees or have a seasoned crew, there are still significant changes and demands on everyone. And it will require additional training and disinfectant procedures on high touch points and increased frequency of those touch points. You may also be facing increased wages to attract and retain talent. And with all of these new demands, we understand how important it is to be able to train employees quickly and efficiently and have the right tools to do that. And in terms of efficiency, with all of these new demands and likely not much larger budget, we understand that you have an even greater need for the efficiency of your operation. Whether that would be through your products, your procedures, or training, our goal is to help you address these needs in today's presentation. So let's review the agenda. I will be talking about preparing for resuming operations, and then Max is going to take you through safeguarding your employees and best environmental hygiene practices across your operation. And in this process, you'll get some procedure ideas, checklists, and then employee and customer reassurance ideas. So in terms of preparing for and resuming operations, what we talk a lot on our side about is you may and your teams may likely work faster and furiously trying to get a comprehensive plan together and building and resuming your operations. Some of you may have always remained open, as I mentioned earlier, and you've had to adapt on the fly. It's almost like we talk about building the airplane as you go. Whatever the case, we hope to provide insight that will help you reinforce your current approach and maybe fill in some gaps that you didn't have in your previous life pre-COVID. So let's kind of start understanding the risk factors that we're experiencing. The virus enters our facilities through employees, our guests, visitors, vendors, and basically the novel coronavirus spreads through the air when people cough, sneeze, or talk. And unfortunately, we are creatures of habit, and we tend to touch our eyes, our nose, and our mouth, which then in turn contaminates surfaces, objects. We continue to touch, we eat, we shake hands. Hopefully people are starting to change those habits. But if you go to the next slide, Max, the average person touches 300 surfaces in just 30 minutes. So the importance of increased disinfection becomes more and more important, and making sure that we're using the right products to do this is imperative. So overall, a best practice to mitigate that risk is to implement an enhanced hygiene program for public health recommendations focused on standard infection control practices. So to take action, implementing these hand hygiene programs, the public health recommendations focus on standard disinfection, controlling practices, training, and compliance. So getting people to wash their hands frequently with soap and water. When soap and water is not available, hand sanitizer is the second best thing. You want to minimize that close contact. You've seen signs all over the place talking about that 6-foot difference. And then also ensuring you use proper PPE when needed. Couple that personal hygiene along with the environmental hygiene of cleaning and disinfecting, you now have a comprehensive program implemented into your facility. In terms of preparing for resuming operations, you may need to start looking at different high touch points. We're so used to the light switches and tables and chairs, etc., but now more than ever, it's those keyboards and phones that we never used to touch in the past because we were worried about them malfunctioning. I was talking to a customer the other day that said, we can replace keyboards, we can't replace people. So they're heightening the awareness of either having the workers clean and disinfect their keyboards and phones on a regular basis, or they're having their building service contractor do that as an additional task for them. So you can see we've broken down some areas here for your conference rooms and office spaces. cafeteria and dining areas, and then the restroom. I stayed in the hotel recently where I brought my own disinfectant and wiped down that room more than ever, just because I wanted to have that reassurance that the room was safely disinfected. So moving into the safeguarding employees, I'm going to ask Max to step in. Please don't forget at this time to add any questions that you may have over in that Q&A space, and we'll get to those at the end. So Max, I'll head it off to you.
Perfect, thank you. So as we start diving into this a little more, we'll start talking about how you can safeguard your employees, right? So your employees may have some hesitation about returning to work or even continuing to work in this high-risk environment. So what we're going to talk about is, as part of your resume operations plan, you want to be sure that you've communicated with them the various safeguards you have in place to help keep them healthy and confident when coming back. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So one of the first things you want to do is develop this plan and communicate that to your employees, right? So this can range from a lot of different things, just from educating them on the symptoms of COVID-19, how they'll be monitored, and how they'll properly disinfect personal items that they're bringing in and out of the facility, and how all of this is really going to affect and decrease that potential to spread the virus, right? So this plan will ensure that as business ramps up, you have sufficient healthy employees to staff the operation. This will not only help provide the best results for your business, but also give your employees that highest level of confidence when returning, and really just help get operations getting back to as normal as possible. So what can you do to educate your employees to help prevent this and reduce the risk of transmission? So the first thing is washing your hands often and correctly, and covering your mouth and nose when sneezing, right? So that's pretty standard. Some things that you might implement that goes above and beyond is teaching them to avoid close contact with potentially infected individuals, thoroughly cleaning, disinfecting those personal items, staying home when sick, and then when they identify those symptoms, specifically to COVID-19, contacting a doctor immediately in that event, right? So these are all considerations above and beyond the standard personal hygiene measures that we previously discussed, but all very, very necessary to help you return to the work environment as safely as possible. So reviewing one of the most important things we can do is washing your hands, right? So hands are the primary mode of transmission here. So we're going to want to enforce and reinforce this new habit of washing your hands as much as possible, and whenever changing between different activities, such as taking PPE on and off, such as cleaning and disinfecting different areas, right? We're going to make sure that they're washing their hands here, and that proper hand hygiene with soap and water is key. So the wet lather, scrub for at least 20 seconds. That's the happy birthday song twice, if anyone's heard that. And then rinsing and drying with a clean towel or air dryer. Now, hand washing is the best way to reduce this spread, but if that's not available, then alcohol-based hand sanitizer is a good replacement here. We never want to completely substitute alcohol hand sanitizer for hand washing. It should be used as either a replacement if hand washing is not available, or as a supplement after hand washing. So we have additional procedures like this that you can use as well to help reinforce these behaviors with your employees. So we recommend you follow the CDC guidance along with local and federal regulations when considering PPE requirements for employees as well as your customers. Additionally, throughout many of your areas in your operation, this new normal, these new procedures you're going to be implementing may require employees to wear gloves or additional PPE where they hadn't before, right? So it's educating them and making sure when to use this and making sure that they feel comfortable actually going through those steps. For example, when you're donning disposable gloves or removing those disposable gloves. Like we said, reinforce washing hands before to reduce contamination and after to reduce contamination, right? This could also include barrier masks or cloth face masks that you're using on site as well, right? So currently the CDC recommends that everyone wear this in public, and many states are requiring this when actually in the facility, especially when people can't maintain 6 feet from each other, right? So educating them that masks are meant to protect others in case of infection, and that cloth masks are not surgical or N95 respirators, right? You want to use cloth masks because surgical masks and N95 respirators are critical supplies according to the CDC, and they should be reserved for healthcare workers, right? So teaching them that and making sure they're comfortable with cloth masks, teaching them to avoid touching that face mask throughout the day to prevent contamination, and then how to properly reuse it if they are able to, right? So along with this, there's additional guidance on face masks that can be found on the CDC website, and we encourage you to go check that out. All right, so what we want to do next is start diving into what we had referred to as the new normal. So we want to look ahead at what's enhanced cleaning and disinfection in your operation. So Ecolab's always provided best practices for cleaning, disinfecting throughout the operation, but you may be adopting new practices as you move forward here, right? And that's going to require a behavior shift at that unit level to ensure that employees not only understand, but explicitly follow these proper environmental hygiene procedures. In the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the familiar 5 factions of clean that we always preach: time, temperature, chemical action, mechanical action, and overall procedure. Really what we're going to be arguing here is that number 5, overall procedure, is the most important thing moving forward, and making sure that employees understand and follow proper disinfection procedures, right? You want to reinforce these best practices so that they understand they have the best tools, they have the best product, and they have the best procedure to give you the best results here. So diving into this, before we go too much further, let's kind of level set on what cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting are, because there's very specific definitions of these that the EPA has, right? So cleaning is your standard all-purpose cleaner, such as a manual detergent or a spray cleaner that you'd have to remove soil from a surface. This is not registered. It does not kill any organisms. This is just to remove gross food soil, right? So when you step up to a sanitizer, this is now regulated by the EPA and has specific claims, specifically around the number of bacteria that it's reducing, right? So sanitizing claims do not involve viruses, which is very important to identify here, such as COVID-19. They involve bacteria. And it's really just to reduce the number of bacteria to bring it to a safe level for humans to come into contact with. This is why you'd often see this in, say, food contact sanitizer, right? They're usually a little less harsh. When you step up to a disinfectant, now this is actually destroying or irreversibly inactivating both bacteria and viruses. Now this is what you would use for something like COVID-19, which is a virus, right? And these are typically a lot harsher, more concentrated, and often involve longer times in order to get the level of kill that is considered disinfection, right? So it's really important that you understand the differences between these and that you understand that these are regulated by the EPA. But most importantly, you can find a lot of this information on the EPA site. Let's talk through a quick example here. So if you ever have a question, and really what you should be doing is looking up any registered product you have to see how to use it properly. And you can find that number either on the product label or spray bottle label that it's in. And for example, on the left here, we have our 14+ antibacterial all-purpose cleaner. We have a 3-component registration number, right? So that first part is the base registrant company number. Second part is the product number, which is specific to that 14+. And the third one's a sub-registrant company number if, say, a company is sub-registering from another company, right? So you can use that number and go to the EPA site to find the master label, which includes a lot of information, right? So on the right hand, we're going to break that down a little bit so you know what to look for. So for example, our peroxide multi-surface cleaner and disinfectant, you can see that EPA registration number is 1677238. You can go to the EPA site, you can find that master label, and the first thing you should look for is what does it have claims against, specifically around bacteria and viruses, right? And for each of those bacteria and viruses, you're actually going to be required to use this product at a specific concentration and allow a specific amount of contact time where that product is on the surface in order to kill whatever viruses and bacteria it's claiming. So here, for example, we have our peroxide product, which at 6 ounces per gallon, you would need 3 minutes for general disinfection, right? So that's killing everything on that label there. If you decrease that down to 4 ounces per gallon, it actually requires a longer time, it requires 5 minutes. And that's very specific in those instructions, and you need to use this product accordingly in order to follow the instructions that's on the EPA. So in this case, the label is law, and you want to make sure you get that effective kill. Now, another thing that's becoming much more important today is looking for the emerging viral pathogens claim that's on this label too. And really what this does is once the CDC has declared an outbreak, this allows the EPA to look at comparable viruses and bacteria that are on that label and recommend them for a novel virus such as COVID-19. Right? So in this case, you've all seen LIST and likely, where you're looking at disinfectants that are approved for COVID-19 based on another virus that's on that EPA master label. Right? So in this case, we're looking at norovirus. We would use this product according to the directions for use against norovirus. And at 6 ounces per gallon, you can see that's actually 45-second contact time. Right? So as you do that, you're going to want to make sure you follow that as close as possible and give at least 45 seconds of contact time in order to go after that virus. So that's a couple of things you can look for. It is a very confusing topic and hard to look up if you haven't done it before, so always contact the experts or your Ecolab rep that can walk you through a lot of this. So before we get in the actual procedure and talking about what disinfecting looks like, I think it's important to talk a little bit about the frequency of cleaning disinfection at your location too. Right? This is going to be variable depending on any location you're at. It could be mandated by higher up corporate, or it could be unique to your facility. Either way, it's important to look at your specific facility and identify some of the challenges and risks that you have to determine the correct frequency. Right? So here you have your standard frequency. Let's say it's once a day to a couple times a day. You're going to want to increase that based on infection risk. So if there's been an outbreak in or around the area, if you have increased foot traffic, so as things start to reopen up, you might consider increasing that frequency, and then soil load for surfaces that might get dirty and harbor the virus, right? So you're going to want to take all those factors into account, and then along with those, maybe consider product type, soil type, and surface type. Right? So the example we always use is that rural Minnesota facility with maybe lower foot traffic, maybe a lot different than, say, urban New York. In New York City, we're going to have a lot more foot traffic and possibly more infection risk. Each facility is going to have different requirements, and you're going to want to make sure that you evaluate those before reopening. And then consider documenting the frequency of cleaning and disinfection for both your reference as well as to help with training procedures. So what does disinfecting a surface look like? Right? So you're going to want to start with as clean of a surface as possible. That involves pre-cleaning, either with disinfectant cleaner or with another cleaner. Get that surface clean, and then you can apply your disinfectant. Right? So use an EPA registered disinfectant. Apply that surface to the surface based on the directions, either through a spray bottle or a cloth. And then you're going to want to wait. And this is the most important part of this process, because if you don't allow for the right amount of contact time, you may not be getting the kill claims that you want from that product, right? So if it requires 45 seconds, you need to let it sit for 45 seconds and keep that surface thoroughly wetted so that it's in contact, right? Once that time is done, then you can wipe the surface with a clean towel or just allow it to air dry, right? And that'll give you a properly disinfected surface. And this is what you would use for those high touch points that Laura had mentioned previously, like your doorknobs or chair armrests or office desks, something like that, right? What you're going to want to consider for food contact surfaces is a completely adapted procedure here, right? So first you're going to pre-clean again, you're going to apply your disinfectant, and you're going to wait. That's the same as before. But for a food contact surface, per food code, you need to follow that with a rinse with potable water, and then a sanitizing step with a EPA-approved food contact sanitizer, right? So this becomes a multiple-step difference there that you want to make sure that you adapt for those food contact surfaces and make sure that you're following regulatory guidelines. So now that we walked through the procedures, there's various ways to apply a product, either through a manual trigger sprayer application, using a pressure sprayer, which is something similar to maybe applying a traditional pesticide like weed killer, or even electrostatic spraying. The electrostatic sprayer is what I want to focus on here because they're gaining so much traction in markets, especially in large spaces like facilities. Right? These devices apply an electric charge to liquid particles that actually cause these droplets to be attracted to surfaces over time. Right? So the idea here is that it allows for a more uniform and comprehensive coverage of surfaces. Right? But when using it, especially if you haven't before, there are some special considerations when using an electrostatic sprayer. Right? So a couple examples here are ensuring the internal components are compatible with that chemistry, you have the proper nozzle size, you have the proper PPE worn, and that you're applying at the correct distance. Right? So what we do is we encourage you to contact your Ecolab representative if you're using an electrostatic sprayer, and they can help set you up with the right procedures, the right PPE, the right product, and get you set up to go there. Right? And then finally, before we start diving into best practices here, we want to talk about cleaning soft, porous surfaces. And this is a question that gets asked a ton, which is why we want to address it here. Right? So first thing we want to call is that disinfectants are designed and certified for hard, non-porous surfaces. Right? So they typically can't be used for virus claims on items like furniture or office chairs. Right? So what do you do in this case? Right? The CDC currently recommends cleaning these surfaces with soap and water based on that manufacturer's recommendations. In addition, if they can be laundered, best practice is to launder those. Right? And then if you're cleaning certain areas like a floor or carpet, vacuum after cleaning as you normally would. Right? So important thing to note here is there are a lot of products out there that have soft surface sanitizing claims. Again, like we talked about before, those sanitizers are focused on bacteria and not viruses, right? So let's make sure we get the right procedures and the right product in place for you in this case. All right, so next we're going to talk about best practices across that operation. And we're going to pull in a couple different areas and really just dive into this here. For public areas, this is where disinfection should be most frequent, right? This is your high traffic areas like your lobbies, your entranceways, your check-in desks if you have visitors coming in. So currently the CDC recommends that these areas are disinfected multiple times per day. And as we just discussed, high foot traffic is one of the risk factors that you may want to assess your facility for, right? So if this risk is huge, then that may affect your frequency. A couple recommendations that we have is just focus on disinfection on high-touch, non-porous surfaces, and ensure that these treated surfaces remain wet for the proper contact time. Okay? You're going to want to disinfect those surfaces between interactions. So we mentioned the check-in desk, for example, if you have visitors. This is something where you may want to have a disinfectant ready in between visitors. Okay? Offer hand sanitizer in these areas, especially when hand soap and water is not available. And then use signage to encourage physical distancing and the use of required PPE. Right? So you're going to want to basically just set those expectations for any visitors or employees coming in if there's specific PPE required. Right? And that's really best practice. A couple other things that we can recommend is consider removing non-essential items and rearranging these common areas if there's any seating or congregating areas to help comply with social distancing. Right? So as you start to retrain and bring people in and your employees in, we're going to want to make sure that they are, again, familiar with these new procedures as much as possible. And if one example we want to pull up here is just trash and recycling collection. This is something that was obviously very frequent, maybe happened every day, but maybe you didn't incorporate something like a multi-purpose disinfectant in there since a lot of people are touching it now, right? So what you want to do is create a procedure potentially for those employees so that they have a quick walkthrough and a quick reference. And this is something that Ecolab can work with you on and create something similar as you see here so that you have it well documented and you have a good procedure in place. Okay? Along with this, another good tool would be to create a checklist. right? So again, there's going to be a lot of new steps, potentially different areas that they may not have cleaned before, and using products that they may not have used before, right? So creating this checklist not only helps you walk through your facility and figure out what you need to clean and at what frequency, but also then reinforces this behavior for your employees and reinforces that kind of new normal here, okay? So again, the checklist is very, very helpful moving forward. So those procedures and checklists can be super helpful. Right now, you should be making these probably for each of these different areas we're going to look at here. But we're just going to walk through and give a quick overview of what our recommendations are, for example, in cafeteria and dining areas. So you're going to increase that disinfection of high-touch, non-food contact surfaces and increase the frequency there. You're going to want to train your staff on proper hand hygiene protocols, as well as what PPE they should be wearing in these areas. And then again, focusing on what's a food contact and a non-food contact surface. If it is a cafeteria, maybe minimize the items that are offered on tables. And if there is any, disinfect those between use. Encourage that physical distancing by spreading out tables and encouraging any of your staff to minimize the use of high traffic areas. Maybe even consider adding like an expanded grab-and-go option here too, right? And then if there's any menus, maybe consider office paper or posted menus, again, just to reduce those high touch points. Restrooms will be another big focus for you here too, right? So for these, you're going to see the similar recommendations where we're increasing that frequency of those high touch point surfaces like faucets, like dispensers and sinks, and toilets potentially too, right? You're going to want to ensure that your hand soap is sufficiently stocked and that paper towels or hand dryers are available so they can properly wash their hands. And you might even want to consider adding a hand sanitizer as a supplement here too. Right? Consider posting a cleaning schedule in the open, not only for your employees and your staff to keep track of, but also for any visitors that are coming in and out too, so it gives them the highest level of confidence that you're actually going through and cleaning and disinfecting. Right? And then finally, employ a bathroom cleaner disinfectant that's approved for use against COVID-19 and one that's for use with all your surfaces in there too. Right? So you want to make sure that you have the best cleaner disinfectant possible. And our final area that often gets overlooked in these is our faculty and staff break room. Right? So again, you're increasing that frequency of cleaning and disinfection, but maybe here you're actually posting hand hygiene guidance to help reinforce this behavior with your staff. You can provide disinfectant or disinfectant wipes for areas that the staff is responsible for self-cleaning, right? Spread out the seating in here again to encourage physical distancing. And finally, consider staggering your shifts and breaks to minimize the staff gathering in large groups. So all of these recommendations, along with many others, can help provide that safe environment for returning back to work and just reducing that risk of transmission as much as possible. Right? And these best practices are great, especially when reducing that risk and making sure that you're confident. But you can also use different tactics to assure that your visitors and that your staff are confident when you're resuming operations as well, right? So along with that increasing of cleaning and disinfection, you might want to consider doing it in high traffic areas where there's increased visibility. So people do know that you're actually following the proper disinfection steps and that you are doing this. Again, adding signage or queuing for lines, but that signage can not only be for PPE, but also maybe some instruction on how you're cleaning and disinfecting too. Right? And then finally, consider giving visitors the opportunity to provide feedback on cleanliness of your operation so that you can reinforce your commitment to their well-being. Right? This is going to give them confidence, not only that what they're giving you feedback on that you're going to fix, but also it gives you a heads up if something is getting missed too, right? So it's good for both sides here. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Laura again, who can walk you through a bunch of these response and recovery resources that we have available.
Great, thanks, Max. And in a minute, we'll cover off on some Q&A that have been coming in as well. So Ecolab has been working very diligently since the beginning of March, trying to create resources for you to stay safe and healthy when in work situations. All of these resources can be found at ecolab.com/coronavirus-facilities. And these are designed to help you not only get ready, but also to be able to answer questions that people may have in terms of dwell time and cleaning and disinfecting, the differences between the sanitizer and the disinfectant that Max reviewed. There are procedure guides in there, employee training, and hygiene procedures and reopening checklists. We have a wide variety of tools to really meet any learning need that you might have. And if something that is not on there that you feel you need, please feel free to reach out to your Ecolab associate to get more specific and get training on site as well. The other thing too is these resources that we're showing you here are for facilities, commercial facilities to reopen. We also have a section for long-term care chains as well as higher ed and K through 12 in there, because we know that the needs of those facilities are very specific versus these commercial facilities. So you'll see a vast amount of knowledge that has been poured into these tools. And we've really tried to cover as many bases as we possibly can in a very short period of time. And in the past, these would have taken years to get ready and out on there, but we've been trying to work very fast. So, Alexis, we have about a little less than 20 minutes to kind of review some of the questions that have been coming in. Are you seeing any trends with some of the questions?
Yeah, we have a number of questions around disinfection, so I can start there and would certainly encourage everyone who is listening in right now, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to submit those, and we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. If we are not able to address your question on this call, we'll do our best to follow up afterwards. Great, so where I will start here on the topic of disinfection. We had a question come in asking about what the best chemical or cleaning solutions to use for disinfection are. And as a follow-up to that, do we really need to disinfect, or is just cleaning high-touch areas enough?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I can take that. So I think when it comes to what's the best disinfectant you can use, there are a lot of considerations, right? And there's a lot of common active components out there like quats and like peroxide. But what you're going to want to really consider, you're going to want to make sure you understand that EPA label and that it's giving you the contact time that you need. So what's the quickest contact time you can get? And not only that, but is it compatible with the surfaces that you're cleaning, right? And that's why there are so many of them out there. We want to make sure that you get the right one that's giving you the best cleaning, the best compatibility, and then the best overall coverage based on your operations. So what I would encourage you to do is reach out to that Ecolab rep too, and they can give you a customized answer for that. We have lots of good disinfectants. We want to make sure you get the right one.
Yeah, Max, if I could just add to that as well, PPE is also a consideration when choosing your disinfectant. There are products out there, obviously. We're partial to ours, but that's not what this is about. It's really about educating you to find products that if you have people using disinfecting on a regular basis and PPE is an issue, there are products out there that are PPE-free.
And then to answer the second part of that question, you really want to make sure that you are following that with a disinfection step on high-touch surfaces. If you're just cleaning, you're not getting that viral kill or bacterial kill for that matter either. So using products that maybe are a 2-in-1 disinfectant can help with that, where you have a cleaner and a disinfectant in one step, right? And that can help minimize labor as well as helping you get the highest confidence to those high touch points.
Great, thank you. And the other piece I would add to that on selecting disinfectants too is just in current times making sure that those are on EPA list N so that they've shown that efficacy against SARS-CoV-2 as well. All right, so we also have a couple of questions that I'll shoot your way, Matt, regarding dwell time. So first, I know you spoke to dwell time. can you just explain in a bit more detail, does that time need to be spent wet the entire time or just undisturbed after application?
Great question. All right, so for that dwell time that we talked about, you're actually going to want to make sure that surface is wetted with that solution at that time, right? So if you're spraying it, and let's say you need a 5-minute contact time, if you spray it and it dries after 3 minutes, you're going to want to make sure that you reapply solution so that it is fully wetted for that 5 minutes, right? So it's not just applying it and then walking away and wiping it 5 minutes later. It does need to be wet. Very good question.
Great. And then building on that one, after the dwell time is complete, is it required to wipe away the disinfectant, or does it just have to sit and you can just leave it after that?
Yeah, so if it's a non-food contact surface, you can just apply it and then walk away and let it air dry, right? So you can allow that. You don't have to go back and wipe that. If it is a food contact surface, that's when you does require a rinse step and a sanitizing step, right? So knowing the difference between those two surfaces is super important. But if it's not, you can go ahead and spray it, air dry, and be good.
Great. And then we have another question on disinfection, specifically regarding when there are other people present in the area. So the question on what type of disinfection is best to use in a company that's 24/7 where there are always other workers on site?
Yeah, good question. So I think the best thing you can do is, again, you're going to want to minimize any potential exposure. And this is where maybe a trigger sprayer application or an immersion method where you're applying it to a cloth and wiping down that surface could be best when there's other people in the area. My guess is this is kind of directed at, can you use electrostatic spraying? And what we typically recommend is making sure that nobody else is in that room when using electrostatic spraying so that you minimize as much potential contact as possible, right? So in that case, following the directions on that product label and using either a trigger sprayer or a cloth and bucket method may be your best option there.
Great. While we are still on that topic, switching gears into some more specific disinfection topics around electrostatic spraying. Can you speak to what kind of products would be recommended for application with an electrostatic sprayer? And specifically, can all types of chemicals be applied with electrostatic sprayers?
Very good question, right? So we always want to say that you follow the directions that are on that EPA label. What we can say is the EPA is also recognizing the use of electrostatic sprayers is becoming very frequent. And they're working with different companies and making sure that their products can work here in this application. So typically you want to make sure that at least it has a spray direction on that EPA master label. Now, that being said, that's because of these changing times and changing environment. So the EPA is working on specific regulations there. So what I would say is work with your specific chemical provider, and they can find the best product for you for your specific electrostatic sprayer.
Great, thank you. Also on the topic of electrostatic spraying, there's a specific question around whether Ecolab has products with low enough dwell time that you could safely spray electronics like keyboards and phones using the lowest level nozzle setting on the Victory electrostatic sprayer. Maybe more generally, you could just address kind of whether electrostatic sprayers would be recommended for use on things like keyboards and phones as well.
Yeah, I think in general, we typically will defer to the manufacturer's recommendations on that. So you want to make sure that you understand what they're recommending if that will damage or impact the electronic. Typically, we do often recommend kind of the immersion method where you spray a product on a cloth and then apply. So using a product that applies that way. But if you are spraying it in an area where there's electronics like computers and keyboards, just making sure that you maybe target away from that area and come back with a different application method, or work with your purchaser or manufacturer to get appliances that would fit that mode of cleaning.
Right. And then Max, I'm not sure if you'll know this, but can you speak to whether there are any disinfectants approved by the EPA currently that have residual claims for disinfection?
Residual claims, I don't know off the top of my head any specific products with that. We have seen in the past where they're focused on sanitizing, so oftentimes it'll be for bacteria only, right? So again, this is where you really want to consult that EPA master label and make sure you understand what the claims are there. It is very hard if it does have residual, if someone comes into contact with it, that risk of dirtying it goes up, right? So what I'll say is that probably cleaning and disinfecting with higher frequency is the more conservative approach in a lot of those areas. But always consult that EPA master label. That is the law, and that is the truth in this case if it has those claims.
Great, thank you. Switching gears a little bit to kind of soft surfaces and how to address those, could you speak to what someone can do for carpet to address COVID-19, or maybe just soft surfaces in general?
Yeah, and it is a hard spot. We're getting this question a lot, right? Because disinfectants really aren't approved for surfaces like carpets where you have a lot of porous material and porous surfaces, right? So the CDC really does just recommending cleaning it with soap and water, right? So using maybe some of the current practices you already have for cleaning carpets over time, you might want to increase that frequency perhaps. If you did it once a week, maybe you're doing it 2 to 3 times a week to help reduce that amount, right? And then making sure that you're using the right product for those areas so that you're not damaging that material too. And then, again, if it's carpet, vacuuming as usual afterwards too.
Great, thanks. So switching away from disinfection and moving into hand hygiene and sanitizers, could you speak to the difference between the World Health Organization sanitizer formula and more traditionally available hand sanitizers?
Sure, yeah, and probably the biggest difference there between the two, so who created a formula that they approved for use as a hand sanitizer so that they could create really an easily manufacturable product, and they could get out the door quickly and get it to as many people as possible. So really one of the things that they've changed, or they took out, I should say, is maybe some of those gelling or thickening agents there. So you don't get that really nice gel, clean feeling sometimes with it. It's a little more liquidy, and it feels wetter almost. That's really the biggest difference from a material standpoint, and where you'll see some of the benefits of maybe your traditional alcohol hand sanitizer, right? And then they have 80%. I think the CDC recommends 60% and higher too. But again, that 80% was just designed to give the biggest amount of confidence and get it out the door quickly and make sure that we're protected as much as possible. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. So switching gears in the questions again, I'll direct this one at Laura. For facilities that are closed or maybe operating at a lower capacity, do you have any advice on things that they could be doing now to be more prepared when they do fully reopen?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, in my experience, a lot of people and building service contractors want to keep people employed. So as office buildings are closed down, they're utilizing the time to ensure that the facility is up and running in a high capacity way when the workers come back. What I mean by that is, how often do we have facilities that are completely shut down where we can strip and refinish the floor or clean the carpet even going in and making sure that everything is operational with light bulbs and all of the operational things that typically when workers are in the building, you can't accomplish. So making sure that the building is ready to go when the workers come back into the facility is critical. Think of the old days when schools were shut down and the workers could actually strip and refinish the floors without people running in on the floors. Nowadays, that's very rare because buildings are open, or they used to be, sometimes 24/7 with different sporting events or meetings or educational seminars. So it's a great opportunity to make sure that the building is in tip-top shape when it is reopened.
And then we have one more question come in, probably sparked from the hand sanitizer discussion earlier. Max, could you speak to what alcohol-based hand sanitizer you would recommend for use in the kitchen?
Good question. You do have to make sure if you are using hand sanitizer as a final step for, say, hand washing in the kitchen, you do have to make sure that it is food code compliant, right? So it's working with your chemical provider to make sure that you have a food contact safe sanitizer, really. And if you don't, that's when you'd have to follow it with a washing your hands, right? So you always have to end washing your hands or with a food code compliant hand sanitizer. One point I do want to make that I didn't touch on the last question too is that the FDA actually doesn't allow for antiviral claims in hand soaps or hand sanitizers like the EPA does. So that is why the CEC came out and recommended using anything with 60+% of alcohol for that hand sanitizer, so that it could give you the highest confidence, basically, that you're killing the virus on your hands too. So 2 things to keep in mind there. But again, in general, work with your chemical provider, make sure it's food contact safe.
Great, thank you very much. Well, we are right at time. I want to thank everyone for attending today. Thank you for the engagement and the questions. I hope you found this information useful. Once we do have these resources available online, we'll send them out. And we would certainly invite you to check out ecolab.com/coronavirus, where you can find information specific to facilities, education, long-term care, lodging, food service, or whatever industry is most applicable to you. And thank you again for attending. Hope you all have a great day.